Hello everyone, Revan619 here. Today I am going to be showing off a Castigator Operative Assassin build. This one is going to require a little bit of explanation, but we'll go into all the pieces that build it together after we've shown off a little bit of combat here. Now, one of the most useful things about going Castigator is the fact that you can use That's an Order to move enemies away from you and stack them up. Yes, this is a weaker, jankier version of Cassia's Point of Curiosity. However, it is quite useful to set up and use it in the earlier game, especially before you get access to Grand Strategists and you are getting rushed. One thing that you may notice quite quickly when using the arc rifle in Act 1 is it doesn't have additional hit chance or additional dodge reduction, so this can make it feel like it is quite hard to land your shots, but it will get easier as you increase your ballistic skill. You will want to make sure you are definitely firing within your range of the weapon, as to avoid any issues popping up where you're just missing your attacks because of it. However, you can also use this to stack up enemies for Cassia, so in the instance I have here, she's been able to set up a very nice little stair because of the That's an Order coming in from the allies. Though I did accidentally clip an ally there that I didn't intend to, but we can ignore that little mistake for now. The Cascade is going to be your prime target as an ally for taking extra turns when it comes to shooting groups of enemies. For this build, I won't be using Fortress World because it did take quite a heavy nerf this update, where it no longer procs on the first turn and it no longer procs on extra turns, meaning it can only proc on your second main turn. For me, this means Fortress World is a lot less viable, so in order to fix the attack economy issues that we're going to see on Operative, we're going to have to rely a lot more on Scorchers. This means that once we do have access to Finest Hour, we will be a little bit crutchy on that, but it isn't one that is going to shock you too much. All Operative builds require a lot more support than your average build if you're using, say, a Soldier or Warrior, but that doesn't mean we can't use that anyway. This is a team game after all, so having to use allies to set up isn't a bad thing, it just means that it might not be your primary choice for a solo run. Now, you will notice that sometimes the arc rifle shots do look a bit janky, and because of your attack economy, you're not going to clear as easily early on as you would do with other builds. Operative doesn't increase attack economy, so you're going to be very reliant on the talents and having enemies stacked up. As long as enemies are stacked up, you'll be able to increase your attack economy because of the arc rifle talents we're going to take on this build, but sometimes you will have weird situations where you should have hit that you then miss. This seems to be a bug that is affecting operatives in general, and you do see it quite a bit on single shots. You were seeing it on arc rifles previously with Claim the Bounty, but I have noticed it on sniper rifles as well, so I don't think it is exclusive to arc rifles. But if we're ever going to see a fix in that, I don't know. However, on a full run, you won't really notice it that much. There'll be a few instances where you'll miss a shot that you feel like you should have hit, but beyond that, this is still going to be a very competitive build. The main gameplay loop of an assassin is dealing damage to increase your damage. So as your lethality goes up, you'll do more damage. As enemies lose health, you'll do more damage with Killing Edge. So you'll tend to group up enemies, set them up with a Death Whisper, which if you have a lot of procs of damage, will actually reset your Death Whispers. You only need 10 procs of damage not to hit 10 enemies, which is why we will be taking talents that allow us to proc additional instances of damage. And then when we combine that with our Killing Edges, we will actually be able to increase our attack economy. As you notice, I took a Death Whisper there and I still have another Death Whisper, so we are able to keep up our attack economy. You can also abuse this with Death Whisper, and there does seem to be a high number that you can use before they reset, though it isn't quite infinite. The main gameplay loop coming in from Operative is going to be setting up with things like Perfect Spot, applying exploits to enemies, and then you'll be using your Arbitrator abilities to either trigger additional willpower checks if enemies are close, stacking them up if they're close, or if not, increasing your crit chances by giving them Death Sentence. I'll explain more of that after the gameplay footage. But the ideal scenario is a officer like Cassia would have given you buffs, and she would have stacked up enemies with her Point of Curiosity. If I then pop out some exploits here, we do get a high number of them coming in, and then if I use my Precise Attack, I can use that to increase our perception. So what I've got here is probably one of the most perfect scenarios where we've got a lot of high value targets linked up. Now, whilst I can't use my Arbitrator abilities here, I will be able to use Precise Attack. I'll start with Death Whisper to just sort of circle some damage here, which will then jump to other enemies that are nearby. As you can see, it jumped to the enemy left, but it didn't hit this main group. However, I'm pretty confident if I hit that main group with my Killing Edge, it will proc back to the Hellbrute. And as you can see, an exceptional amount of damage that cleared out most of the battlefield from a single shot there, which I can then follow up with either a dispatch or even a dismantling shot. You pick whichever you think is most useful in the situation. If you're not planning to get all the kills and you want to lower enemies, you will lower their stats and armor with the dismantling shot. Or if you just want to blow up something really nicely, you can do it just like that. You will see some big power creeps on this build, namely as you get into your assassin, when you get Killing Edge, but more importantly when you get Notes on Weakness in Act 4. Whilst this build isn't reliant on being in Act 4, you will notice that it becomes extremely more potent in Act 4 because of Notes on Weakness and the having access to Malign Influence. This build does trigger willpower checks with Malign Influences to get extra pots of direct damage. The reason we do this is there are two sides to Assassin. One that gains benefits from when you proc direct damage, and one that gains benefits from building lethality. I will explain both of those very shortly, but you will be seeing some very good damage numbers. Now, I haven't set this up to show off the highest amount of damage, I've just set this up to show how easy it is to clear it. As you can see, I do have access to a lot of stims that we could be abusing here that I haven't really gone into. But, yeah, the damage is going to be very, very potent. There is going to be spoilers for the Trazyn encounter here, so if you don't want to see that, do skip ahead to the next section, and I won't hold it against you. Now, the reason I am not skipping Cassia buffs is I think it's actually very good to see how the buff rotations work. So I don't stack every source of infusing that you can, I just go for some very basic ones with Reveal the Light from Cassia, and then just standard officer buffs. Trazyn, for those of you who don't know, on Unfair, you can use 8 abilities before he gets an interrupt turn where he can make multiple attacks. I've realized I've put Pascal a little bit too close to my predecessor, so he probably will get one shot here. But what I'm trying to do is just put on a couple of debuffs from Cassia on Trazyn, because if he's going to take an extra turn, I might as well debuff him anyway. Honestly, this encounter, whilst not really part of the build in general, I do like the way that they've designed it. And one of the reasons why I wanted to use this encounter was just to show how exceptionally strong the secondary part of this build is, which is using the Promise of Freedom and Retribution pistols. These are pistols that come in Act 1 and they are exceptionally potent for an assassin. Whilst the main crux of this build is an arc rifle, having these pistols in your secondary slot does a lot. It does an absolute lot, and you're about to see that here. So, as I said, Trazyn is actually going to shoot my ally, which is therefore going to get Pascal killed, because Pascal takes double energy damage, so there is no way he can survive that. But now that this encounter is set up, yeah, all you have to really do is kill Trazyn's first form, and then he loses his interrupt actions. So I am a dogmatic player, so I get to ignore his armor. Though because I'm using direct damage, I probably would have ignored that anyway. So this is a prime time that I could be using stuff like that's in order, but I don't need to. So if I just set up Death Whisper on one of my Promise pistols, you set up Death Whisper to then Killing Edge with the offhand using pair holster, so you get that free attack economy, and you would absolutely be able to blast Trazyn. Unexpectedly, however, he didn't survive the initial blast of the first pistol to set up. So this build is so powerful, the setup is able to take out the hardest boss encounter in the game before you can even follow up with the damage. Now, I'm just skipping across. I haven't done anything in the combat that you didn't see. It was just I was so shocked at the damage that I went back through and read it. Following up with the secondary pistol, you can see that you do an exceptional amount of damage. Now, I have the sharpshooter's boots on this build. Honestly, even though it is a bug, the best boots to use in any build is the inertia boots, because it turns criticals into MP. However, I don't need to do that to finish this encounter. What I am going to need to do, however, is slightly reposition myself to continue shooting things. So I'm probably going to need to use a stim, just because of Trazyn teleport so far that he is outside of my range. So, yeah, I can't quite follow up and continue shooting his allies because of literally one cell away from my maximum range. But that is why we have stims. Yeah, I actually save stims mostly for boss encounters, as you will see here. And this is so we can set up and continue all the fun. And what is interesting about arc rifles is even though that's a 95% chance and it missed, it still killed other enemies around him. Again, it's doesn't seem to be killing that warrior, but it did kill Trazyn, which was then able to progress the battle and move him to his next spot. Because he can't get interrupt turns, again, there's not going to be much he's going to be able to do to stop us. And because we are resetting some of our attack economy due to the arc rifle talents that, again, I'll be going into, even if we didn't have fine style, we would be able to keep making a lot of attacks. So I used the dismantling shot, which took out some of his guards near him, and as his health goes down, he will be taking extra damage coming in from his arc rifle shots. Yeah, there really isn't much Trazyn can do here. I didn't even have to set up too well. Now, there are lots of parts of this build that I actually haven't used yet in this encounter. So this is increasing my intelligence damage by using tactical knowledge. But for now, I'm just going to keep blasting him. I could have set more willpower checks, but again, I just really didn't need to. Now, I apologize to anyone who might be coming in as one of their first Revan videos, because there's going to be some things that I don't go into too much detail on because I have covered it greatly in previous videos, and I'm sure the regular viewers are getting sick of hearing the same things. However, part of the gimmick that we are using here is helms that give us willpower checks on attack, which will proc many things such as malign influence for assassin. We'll go into more about why we're doing that when we talk about those bits, but the other pieces of gear are going to be a little bit more up to your choice. I like the Vial of Fausto because it stops me being slow and mobilized, and it gives me a lot of starting resolve, and you can use that additional movement to start and get set up with the inertia boots. Like I said, I don't have the inertia boots on, but that would be a lot better for making this a mobile killy build, especially with the fact that we have the promise of freedom and the promise of retribution pistols. Don't worry, you do not need to remember or pause the video at any point for any of this, because it will all be provided in the spreadsheet below, which has links to the wiki which shows off what these all do. But the pistols will pair very nicely with these pair holsters from Act 2, which will give you a free attack at 0 AP if you get a critical hit on one of your burst fires. On the backpack, I have the Temperis Carapace Elite backpack because it increases the rate of fire of the pistols. Now, you could use the compensator gloves to increase this further, but I felt like I've not really needed to, so I like getting the additional ballistic skill. At the moment, I have the arc rifle Mindstorm. The reason for this is well, yes, additional base damage, and the number of arcs will increase based on the talents that we have from buffs that we get to allies for our intelligence. Again, that up is going to be very useful. The arm piece I have on is one of the many options that we have to increase our armor from our stats. Because I'm using a Voidborn with Be Smart, coercion actually scales from our intelligence, so we will get quite a bit of armor. Earlier on, you can use the Breacher's armor with St. Cognatus' scriptures, and we can have quite high stats over there. You will find that you will swap onto different neck pieces, and I've put some options into the spreadsheet below. When we talk about each of the features of this, we should probably separate from the Origin, the Tier 1 and the Tier 2. So from the Origin talents, we get Death Sentence. The Arbitrator inflicts stacks of Death Sentence effect on the enemy. Each stack increases the enemy's chance to be critically hit by 1% and reduces their perception and willpower by -2. Whenever the target under the effect suffers damage from the attack, it suffers +1 stack of Death Sentence. The effect lasts until the Arbiter's next turn. Now this does scale with your coercion, so that's why we're on a Be Smart build, and it can be useful in the early game to set up some critical hit chances. That's an order. The Arbiter chooses a cell within 6 cell radius. All enemies within a 3 cell radius around the Arbitrator must make a willpower resistant test with a -18 penalty. On a failed test, if possible, they immediately move to that designated cell. That willpower test will work with malign influence, which we'll come into more later. Next one, in the name of the Lex Imperialis. For 1 round, the Arbitrator and their allies gain immunity to the prone, stunned, immobilized, and cannot attack effects, as well as to all types of forced movement. Enemies must pass the willpower resistant test with a -18 penalty or become immobilized until the Arbitrator's next turn. This will also proc damage just because enemies have to take those checks. This is one of the reasons why we're using Castigator, because it makes our shots have higher hit critical chance, as well as having options to increase some more willpower checks. If you didn't want to use Arbitrator and say you wanted to use Crime Lord, I do have that build available in the spreadsheet below. Whilst I'm not going to read out every talent because, again, these are all in the spreadsheet below with links to the wiki, I will talk about some of the key components here. So analyze enemies, yeah, this will be what sets our exploits and will give us extra perception bonus damage, and any extra turns will stack this, as well as counting over to bounty hunters. So having a bounty hunter in the party that has a prey mark that can then set more prey, that's going to be very useful to switch between the two to start stacking exploits. So this build pairs very well with Pascal. Exposed weakness, I find I don't use too much because lowering enemies' dodge and parry and armor hasn't been one that you need to do, especially when you're doing a lot of direct damage, or especially when you get Dogmatic 4 and you ignore enemy defenses. Tide of Excellence, because of the arc rifle, you will build up a lot of, so you will get a lot of extra damage, and this does stack very, very high. Be Smart is going to be the one that gets your coercion to scale from your intelligence, so you will be able to do a little bit of skill monkeying, but not so much on Unfair. Uncanny Sight is going to be useful to making sure that we constantly stack exploits and enemies. You'll find from Act 2 you probably start one turning, so this gets less useful, but in future versions of the game, if they do add on a new difficulty, so turns do, well, combats do go more than one turn, you'll get a lot more use out of this, but it is very useful to have. Perfect Spot is the ability I like to get first because extra perception and ballistic skill is very useful for arc rifles, because like sniper rifles, well, unlike sniper rifles, they don't get that extra hit chance or dodge reduction, so some people find this very helpful to have, as do I. Lawful Intervention, yep, this will mean we can parry with our guns. It's not key to the build, but is one I find very helpful, but we are going to start building Arc early. I take Liturgy of Insulation here because, yeah, we don't want to damage allies, though debuff effects will still apply to allies. I go for the Dismantling Attack Upgrade 3 because lowering enemies' dodge and armor is quite useful if we're not killing on that initial shot. Ballistic Calculation is one that you will see quite a bit of because, yeah, you will be shooting enemies at range, and you'll normally always have exploits up. Like I said, I get That's an Order early because it gets enemies off you and allows you to shoot up, and you're not going to have access to the really powerful pistols until you've done DLC 1 in Act 2. Overclocking module is going to be very important for, as you receive buffs, it increases the range of your arc jumps. Now, we're not going to get the insane distance like you do from the MK Tactician Cerebral Inverter because we're not a Master Tactician, unfortunately. Assassin Operative doesn't have access to that. Fresh Target is going to be one that is going to be quite useful, but you could swap that out if you did want to swap something out. I would recommend swapping this one because obviously not all enemies will be at full health, so that one can be freely replaced. Though Armor Piercing is going to be very useful because, yeah, your attacks reduce enemies' armor, so that'll be helpful to allies if you're not killing in the early game, but chances are you are going to kill very quick and easily. I also take the Dismantling Attack Upgrade 2. So what Operative is mainly doing is increasing your damage via your perception. So building up your perception is going to be useful, especially with buffs from allies. So the focus buff on a ally officer will be very potent. And if you can build up a lot of stacks of allies, you will be doing some obscene damage. You won't build it as quickly as stacking 2 bounty hunters, but just having one in the party will be quite useful. Assassin has 3 parts going for it that you need to keep in mind: openings, lethality, and direct damage. Now, what Seek the Opening does is, much like exploits, on your turn it will apply a opening to enemies that on a side, if you attack it, you will deal additional damage based on their maximum wounds. So it can be useful to get some extra damage. The second key component is lethality. As lethality goes up, you will increase your damage of killing edge by your lethality, so you will deal extra damage. You'll also do extra damage if they are missing health. The third part that we're going to be building up is direct damage because of vulnerable. Whenever the assassin deals direct damage to an enemy, that enemy suffers a stack of the vulnerable effect. What this does is the character suffers number of vulnerable stacks times 8% more damage from the assassin's attack. This can quickly build up to obscene numbers, though enemies do die quite quickly. Lethality has talents that we do take that can build it up. So we have Deadly Calculation. For every 10 damage dealt by the assassin, the attack also does 1 direct damage. Then within the Demise, that becomes extra damage that we do. Lethality heightens whenever the assassin deals 5 or more direct damage to an enemy. With a single attack, the assassin gains 10 lethality until the end of combat. So that's how we stack that with direct damage. We will also take in things like residual charge. Whenever the character hits a target with an arc rifle, they gain 1 residual charge stack. When reaching 10 stacks, they immediately gain an additional attack with the arc rifle. Once the effect is triggered, these stacks are removed. This will apply to all your direct damage procs. So if you are proccing Malign Influence, if you are proccing direct damage from the lethality, this applies. So you can get a lot of extra attacks very quickly. So the quicker you get those up, the less you have to rely on Scorchers for additional attacks. I do like things like Perfect Opening, but you can also take Create an Opening, or you could even take Outsmart. Depending on how you play is going to really depend on what you take in the ordering. So if you find that you're not hitting openings very much, so you don't want Perfect Opening, you could easily change that to a different talent. Now, there is a combination of arc rifle talents that seem to have some odd effects. So Staggering Jolt, when the target is hit by the arc rifle, must pass a toughness resistant test or suffer 1 stack of arc shock. Now, this resistant test will actually give you EXP, so you can use that out of combat to gain infinite damage, but it will also increase your shock damage. You can then stack this with Echo Pulse, and what this does, enemies hit by the character's arc rifle suffer a number of Echo Pulse stacks equal 10% of damage dealt. Those stacks last until the end of combat, and this will give you additional shock damage like a dot, even though it's not considered a dot. Every other talent we're going to take is going to be designed around trying to get our lethality up. Now, Killing Spree you might think isn't going to add very much, but because you are going to be buffing your agility from your own officers, you will be getting a little bit of extra damage here. So whenever the assassin hits an opening, the assassin's damage increases by 2%. If you've increased your agility bonus to, say, 100 there, then that is going to be a +5 that you'll get for each opening you hit, and you will hit a lot of openings with this build. One of the main combos that I like is using Disarray and then following that up with a combo which will allow you to start increasing lethality for those single shots, but it isn't something you need to worry about too much. That will be following up Disarray with Seize the Advantage, which will give you 15 lethality against enemies that have any of the follow effects: slow, immobilized, or hemorrhaged, and the bonus gain for each of these effects cannot exceed 45. So this will apply directly to your Death Whisper afterwards as well. As we go into Exemplar, the main thing we are going to be using here is Blind Influence. Whenever an enemy fails a willpower resistance test against a character, they suffer 9 direct damage, which is going to be 3 plus your character's willpower bonus. On successful, the damage on success damage is doubled. Proccing these extra cases of direct damage is going to be useful for many of our talents, so if you can get yourself up to at least 70 willpower, that is very useful. If you're not using buffs, you do want to keep that in mind with gear. But one of the bug talents, which you can only take an Exemplar, is Lethal Concentration. Whenever the assassin attacks the enemy, the assassin gains the assassin's dodge reduction minus target's dodge. At lethality, this bonus cannot be less than 0. So building up your perception is going to be very useful, and there are a lot of other talents that we can use for it. As you can see in here, I do take Lethal Precision, which is why we use one of the eye augments, even though we're not really using them, because the focal emitters will actually cause you to shoot allies even if they take 0 damage. You want to be careful of that. Another damage increase we're going to see is Tactical Knowledge with the upgrade Improved Tactics, so we can get even more of our intelligence involved in on this, so we will be doing more damage because of that. Poised to Strike isn't the biggest use that you could be taking, so you could change this talent if you wanted to, but you're not going to have much agility for, say, Dance Macabre. And Flawless Lunge is going to be an okay one to lower the target's dodge, because it means we can get more bonuses from our previous ones. One of the ones that I find exceptionally useful is going to be Calculated Resolve, which is for each critical hit we score, we get +2 resolve, so we're definitely going to be building up enough momentum to make those heroic actions and abuse them. Contagion is another one that's very useful, because if we have items that are causing willpower checks, stuff like blinded, slowed, fatigued, perplexed, disturbed, these will pass, so Contagion will help spread some of them. So if we're applying all of the effects like our slowed, and with then for, again, more opportunities to apply other effects, this is going to be very useful, especially around our willpower checks. Bloody Mess is another one that I like because it's just there's a chance to double the damage, so it is quite useful to have, and it is useful to get from your Voidborn. One of the big ones is also going to be Masterful Precision. It will allow us to get extra range on our killing edges, as well as doing extra damage, and our Death Whispers. Another very useful one to combine with this one is Masterful Display, which is when the character single shot deals damage to targets other than the main target, they gain 5 bliss skill until the end of combat. Now, if you really want to build up for the pistols to maximize their rate of fire, this is going to be what you go for, because you will build up a lot of ballistic skill for your arc rifle. However, for this run, I wasn't doing that, which is why I took Extermination, but you could freely swap Extermination to Masterful Display for that exact reason. But as stated, the spreadsheet below will have the full build, so you can follow this quite easily. As I said, some of the main things you're going to be using for in the operative area is Tide of Excellence to use those exploits to turn into damage, and taking anything that increases those exploits, like we do around 46 47 with comprehensive and continuous analysis, is going to be very useful for us. Contagion will spread some of our disabling effects, but if you really wanted to change that, you could. I like to have that with either Extermination or Masterful Display, but it's going to be up to you for which you change. However, Death Dealer is very useful here for increasing our attack economy, because that means that first kill will get off another shot. More shots you take, the more likely you are to proc residual charge, and then you can just keep passing out damage. This is a very powerful build, and like I said, you will notice as soon as you have imminent demise that your potency will greatly increase, but Act 4 again notes some weakness. Nothing can survive you in the game for that. I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, do feel free to pop them in the comments below or on the Discord. I know I haven't gone over every individual thing as much as I have done in previous videos, but a lot of this should be kind of straightforward if you've been following the videos now. And if you are new, like I said, feel free to ask any questions. Do check the spreadsheet for links, because these all go to the wikis and it will explain what all of this does. I also have suggestions for potential items that you could be looking to have on here, as well as some of the augments. But keep in mind, these are not one for one. You can change them, though I wouldn't suggest changing Notes on Weakness or Self-Calibrating Helm, because that does most of what this build is doing, whereas the rest you can change. Such as the boots, you could easily put in the inertia boots, so don't think you have to stick to this. I've been Rem619, I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I will see you all next time.